Just as a quick reminder for those who are remote, if you can leave your microphones muted during the meeting, that'd be great. Only on come off you if you're talking or if you're participating. We are live.
Good evening and welcome to the February 4th Conservation Commission meeting. First up, we'll have roll call of members. Joan McKibben, Chairman.
Thomas Levesque, Vice Chairman.
Michael Croto, member.
Andrew Thompson, alternate.
Matt Lepore, member.
Roger St. Laurent, member.
Harry Manzigian, member.
Marion Godzik, alternate. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Diane McGee, alternate.
Thank you. Alrighty, let's see, there's 1, 2, 3. Oh, and is Steve Weber on or not?
Yeah, Joan, since Kevin's not there this evening, I'll act as the select.
Okay, that's number 7. Okay, good. So we're not appointing any alternates. We have a full board. Is there any public input on non-agenda items? Hearing none, we'll go to the first case is the Thoreau site, proposed gas station and self-storage units, 522 Charles Bancroft Highway, impact to wetland buffers. The site walk took place on January 9. And Renee and Jim, you're on.
And just for the record, Madam Chairman, I'm going to be abstaining from this discussion only because
Okay,
I'm the chair of the planning board. So
Andrew, Michael's abstaining. Okay. Okay, Renee.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jim Petropolis. I'm a professional engineer at Hayner Swanson, doing business at 3 Congress Street in Nashville, New Hampshire. Is my voice level okay? Everybody?
It's good.
Good, Joe? Okay, thank you. With me this evening, we're representing Thoreau Properties. With me is Renee Thoreau. Mark Jacobs is the project certified wetland scientist. Mark joins us, as does Morgan Hollis, our project attorney. And Morgan has been involved in the project for a couple of years. What we're hoping to do tonight is to present a very brief update of the project, answer any questions the commission might have. And of course, the reason we're here is we're proposing work within the Wetland Conservation District. And so we're seeking your input to our zoning board special exception request. I think I can share the screen. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. How is that? Can folks see that screen? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you. So as background, the Litchfield Conservation Commission before on January 4th of this year, and also previously in 2019. As Joan just mentioned, the site walk was performed on January 9th of this year with 3 members of the commission, as well as myself, Mark, and Renee. As a reminder, the project consists of 15.3 acres. We're located at 522 Charles Bancroft Highway in the northern commercial zone. And this is a survey map of the property where you can see Leech Brook follows really the southerly property line and the westerly property line. Those wetlands and associated wetlands with Leech Brook were mapped by Mark. And he also found the presence on the site of a kind of a larger poorly drained wetland area right here, located in the kind of the northern part of the property, but really in the central part of the property. And there is a water course that runs through that also connects into Leech Brook in our northwest corner. We've also represented on all of our drawings the town required 50-foot no disturb buffer, the 75-foot building setback, as well as the 100-foot leach setback. As previously discussed at the last meeting, I spent more time walking through the details of the proposed site plan, but just to remind the commission, it is a mixed-use, multi-use project A gas retail facility is being proposed in the front, couple acres, up along the Charles Bancroft Highway. 2 curb cuts, about an 8,800 square foot building with drive-through. We have fuel dispensers in the front and in the rear. And then we've got a connecting driveway to a mini storage facility located in the back of the property. And at that meeting in January, we discussed in much greater detail things such as parking. We discussed utilities. Of course, we've had past discussions about both above ground and below ground fuel storage tanks on the property. And we also talked about stormwater in general. At that last meeting, we described the impacts to the buffer. And you may recall that those buffer impacts occurred near the curb cut onto Charles Bancroft Highway. They occurred through the connecting driveway to the backland. And then there was a buffer impact around a portion of the perimeter of the stormwater management area. That particular plan last January represented 28,455 square feet of impact. Again, a buffer impact. Again, there are no wetlands, no direct wetland impacts as a result of the project. Of those impacts, only 8%, right in here in this buffer area, this connecting driveway, will be paved. 92% of the buffer impacts will be loamed and seeded with a conservation wildlife mix, seed mix that will be more naturalized over time in with the surrounding environment. The closest distance from a pavement to a wetland is this poorly drained area here, this little finger that sticks out, and that's 28 feet. Overall, the project will have 75% of open space. Now on the site walk, it was a brisk morning, a sunny morning. We started here in the front of the front lot and made our way all the way to the back to take a peek at Leech Brook. We got a good glimpse of this poorly drained area here to the north, this wetland here. And then we came back in the same route. 2 items came up during the site walk. We were asked if we could try to minimize the driveway connection. It is a 24-foot drive here. And we've tightened up a little bit of the grading on the sides where we were able to realize about an 820 square foot reduction in buffer. And then if you for those who participated in the sidewalk, you noticed that you may recall we talked about trying to connect into this natural swale here that, and it may have been man-made many years ago, as an outlet to Leech Brook instead of constructing a new outlet. And I believe we can do that. And that also saved us, minimized and lessened the buffer in that location. So this new plan that I present to you this evening represents 27,200 square feet, about a 5% reduction from the January plan. A couple other items that we brought forth in the meeting. We'll be using Cape Cod berm through this driveway section to allow for any smaller animals who might want to migrate across that driveway. Stormwater areas will not be fenced. And that should allow any small critters or any small species to be able to walk overland through those. So in summary, once again, our approach has been to avoid, minimize, and mitigate. We have no wetland impacts. The impacts to the buffers have really been a small impact for our driveway here, impacts for our stormwater and our driveways in these other locations. We've used 3-to-1 side slopes on our shoulders. And we've actually got a significant retaining wall behind this gas station to prevent any buffer impacts here. And we were able to observe that 50-foot no disturb in that particular location. Our stormwater practices address quality and quantity of stormwater runoff. And we believe those treatment practices are important to the project. and should provide the necessary attenuation to prevent any downstream adverse impacts. During construction, obviously, silt sacks, silt fencing, best management practices will be used throughout construction. Lastly, in case you were wondering, it's our hope to proceed through the Litchfield permitting process. Our next stop would be zoning board, followed by the planning board. If successful, we would hope to begin construction late spring, early summer of this year. And that really, Joan, that really kind of concludes what I wanted to say this evening. Again, everyone on the team is available to answer any questions that the commission might have. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Commission members, questions? Roger.
Have we considered making this no salt or limited salt?
That was going to be my question. You stole my question. Jim, chances to make that a no salt area, that the throat area, and then down into the self-storage areas?
Joan, I think that, we've got a pretty, unique, a very consistently graded site that flows from east to west. The front part of the site is quite, flat, for lack of a better word, in those 1% to 2% grades. We do get in kind of a general 4% grade through here. Traditionally, self-storage facilities are not active facilities. They're not like a medical office building where you really worry about people getting in the front doors. I think that a recommendation to the project moving forward to use judicious manners and limited salt use in the back, I think is proper. We're seeing municipalities look towards developers and property owners to use a certified green snow pro expert to do their management and their maintenance, and they're really up to speed on all those. So I think a recommendation along those lines is fair. Yes.
What did you call that? A green what? Green?
I think it's called a green snow pro, SNOPRO.
Okay.
Sanctioned or certified management type person. Yeah.
So I would imagine that we would, in any letter to the ZBA, that we would mention that as well as to the planning board.
That would, like I said, that would be fair.
Okay. And the drainage in the throat area, how is the drainage being treated in the throat area from the gas station to that?
Yeah, so we're using curbing and catch basins to capture our pavement runoff. We wanted to provide, an enhanced catchment in this location, and we're actually taking our runoff through oil hoods, through sediment forebays, and actually this will be a constructed wetland in this location where we've got a lot of kind of softer looking plant materials throughout the wetland. It will then continue to outlet down and through and into the second basin. So we actually get second treatment. This throat is curbed, John, with Cape Cod berm. There are a pair of catch basins and catch basins located in the storage part of the project. And again, discharge to the stormwater before using this naturalized outlet here. So
Okay.
yes, curbing and catch basins, no open swales. Yeah.
So they have 27,200, right, square feet of impact to wetland buffer?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's what they're asking the ZBA for, special exception for
Yes,
working in the wetland buffer.
wetland conservation district, wetland buffer, correct.
Any more questions from the board? Is there any public phoning in that or viewing that would like to ask a question? Hearing none. What is the board's pleasure? They will be going to the ZBA in March, so they need a letter from us one way or the other. Michael's abstaining.
I would move that we recommend the ZBA that this be approved, with the due consideration that they've worked very hard with the Conservation Committee to get the best possible use of this piece of land.
I'll second it.
Okay, Harry seconds. Yeah, I would just add that they have gone to the extent to try to mitigate and minimize the impact. And I'm glad that they narrowed the road down in the throat area. Is there any more discussion on the motion to move a letter to the ZBA to support the 27,200 square feet of impact? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Well,
I
yeah.
have the names of the aye votes, please.
Excuse me? What was that, Diane?
I can't see who's voting. Can you just give me the names of the people that are voting yes?
Okay, Andrew's taking the minutes, but do you want the names anyway?
Oh, I was taking a minute. You want Andrew to do that? You just didn't tell me.
Sorry about that. Okay, so that was, why don't you just raise your hands for the viewing public in favor? Okay, so it's 6 because Michael's not voting. And Stephen, you voted yes? Weber?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so 6, 0, 0, 1, right. Okay, Jim, we will send that letter off to the ZBA.
Yes. I thank you and the commission very much. You have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving right along, so that takes care of that one. Next on the agenda, we have the Litchfield Trail Group. I was in contact with Rob Terry for a presentation about the Litchfield Trail Group.
Yes, good afternoon, Joan. Thank you for having me. The rest of the Conservation Commission as well, and also acknowledge it looks like we also have some
Speak
members
up
of
just
the-
a little bit, Rob. Speak up just a little bit.
Yep. Hopefully you can hear me just fine.
Okay, now that's better.
Okay, I will try to project my voice here. I'll also share my screen. Please let me know if you can see it.
Yep, we can see it.
Awesome. Okay, so I think you have seen a variant of this presentation in the past. We'll try to walk through it pretty quickly because I know there's a number of other agenda items to go through as well. So without further ado, we'll walk through the Litchfield Trail Crew, go through an agenda. We'll talk about an overview of what the Litchfield Trail Crew is, the purpose and mission statement. Then we'll go into a deep dive of the Litchfield State Forest, talk about recent development, particularly the trail closures that have occurred within the past couple months. We'd like to communicate our intent to work with the state at this time as far as continued recreational use within LSF. And then just for purpose of this presentation, it's being provided to the Conservation Commission at this time for informational purposes. We're not requesting any action at this time, but would like some feedback if you would like. So, overview of the Litchfield Trail Crew. It's comprised of citizens within Litchfield looking for more passive recreational opportunities within the town itself. As you can imagine, with COVID, there's certainly been an increase in the number of citizens using the trail system that we have today. And citizens looking to help out. How do you maintain those trails, maybe even increase, right? So as a result of that, we came up with a trail group to help maintain, build, and promote responsible use of trails within Litchfield, and again, emphasize responsible trail use. And it was formed as an independent group, like the Londonderry Trailways, which I think you're familiar with, to be able to work with different land managers, whether they're personal or so-owned or other entities like the state or town. So as we stand today, the Litchfield Trail Crew is comprised of roughly 35 members, broken up into 3 categories. Team Think Tank, which are the organizers, Team Trail Crew, which are the helpers who actually go out, dig dirt, and then a team behind the scenes making this all work. So I mentioned one of the big purposes was to walk through a mission statement. I'll go ahead and read that to you. The Litchfield Trail Crew is an independent group of volunteers who are dedicated to working with town, state, and private land managers to maintain and improve existing trails, as well as create new trails within Litchfield. This group is comprised of volunteers with diverse interests, including walkers, runners, hikers, bicyclists, photographers, bird watchers, snowshoers, and other outdoor enthusiasts who work together to improve passive outdoor recreational opportunities for Litchfield citizens of all ages. So without further ado, I'd like to walk through, change focus a little bit, talk about the Litchfield State Forest, in particular, some of those trail closures that we have seen. To put it in perspective, what we have highlighted here is the Litchfield State Forest, which is comprised of approximately 346 acres. Surrounding that land includes another 237 acres of town land. And then in the next slide, kind of shows why that's a big deal, right? If you look at our, our neighbors, Londonderry and the Musquash Conservation Area, it's comprised of over 1,000 acres and 20 plus miles of trails. And you'll see why that's important in a following slide. So a recent review of the Litchfield State Forest land by the New Hampshire Department of Natural and Cultural Resources resulted in the closure of two trails. The first one being a longstanding Calvin Loop Trail, which is just shy of about a mile. And then also the closure of a recently built, as we understand it, a road trail that is a little bit over half a mile in length. What you see on the left is the trail map prior to these closures. And then on the right is the official trail map for Litchfield State Forest provided by DNCR earlier this year. It's important to highlight that as a result of these closures, it was actually a 42% reduction in multi-use recreational trails within Litchfield State Forest, which, as you can imagine, is pretty significant, especially during this day and age where we have COVID. People are trying to disperse, get out into the environment, and enjoy the resources available to them. So we'd like to highlight Calvin Loop as an example. This trail was pretty long-standing. It's been here for at least 5 years. I know others that have said it's been longer. May have been formed as a result of logging that occurred about 10 years ago. But the state came in, closed the trail off by performing what's called, I believe, hinge cutting of trees to prevent access to the area via this well-maintained trail. It's important to note that the state definitely supports recreation out there. You could bushwhack to go from one end to the other. The concern really is the creation of illegal trails. So I'll get into that in a little more detail shortly. So I'll walk through these. But this just gives you a quick example of what was left behind as a result of closing those trails. So why were they closed? I had a number of conversations with the forester, William Cornelius, along with Scott Rolfe, and also Jim Oler from the state, and ultimately determined that the state's really not very happy with the fact that not only on Litchfield State Forest land, but other state-owned land, that there's illegal trail building. So this serves as a means of buckling down a little bit, right? Other reasons for the closure is we had some improper wetland crossings within LSF, and it could impact wildlife, as you can imagine. And then from a signage and trail marking perspective, it was not up to code. So from a Litchfield Trail Crew perspective, we're trying to focus on Calvin Loop and get this authorized via the proper means and hopefully retain access. There's a little takeaway here as far as the trail impact. I know the state uses a new tool for assessing impact as a result of trails in a particular area. Based on that tool, we're classifying this as a mostly moderate for Calvin Loop. We're kind of ignoring the road trail right now. We acknowledge that that has potentially a very high impact, but you'll see that shortly. So a quick tour, walking through Calvin Loop at various stages through the Litchfield State Forest. As you can see on the right, it's a pretty well-maintained trail. It had quite a bit of foot traffic. It wasn't something that was done recently. It was just walked through various points within that. And as you can imagine, there are a few trees that were taken down as a result of the closure. And this is the one location where there is a potential stream crossing in the springtime. It does get a little wet there, and over time, I believe people created a makeshift bridge. Right, it's not necessarily up to code, but it was something to get across without impacting the wetland area. So obviously, going forward, if we were to get authorization to make this a legal trail through the proper channels, we would have to work with the state to get that up to code and not use logs that are in the vicinity. And this is the entrance closest to Albuquerque. Okay, I mentioned the trail impact mapping tool previously, and done a lot of research here along with Jason Brennan and others as part of Litchfield Trail Crew to try and assess impact based on this mapping tool that was provided by the state. Based on this cursory review, it appears that Calvin Loop is classified as a moderate impact, potentially plus in that one location where there's a crossing for that New Hampshire Fish and Game model. So why is that important? If you take a look on the left, you have Litchfield State Forest, then obviously on the right, you have two examples up top, Bear Brook State Park, Beaver Pond Loop Trail, which has a very high impact. I've actually been in that area earlier this year. Definitely understand why that's a high impact. And then within Musquash itself, part of state-owned land, Long Heron and Mathis trails also have very high impact. Why this is important is there's definitely a precedence for recreational trail use in moderate and high impact areas. I think there's ultimately ways to try and avoid that. As you can see on the left here with Litchfield State Forest, things can be rerouted accordingly to try and minimize impact. And I think that's ultimately what we're trying to do with the state. So how do you actually do that? Building a trail on state land requires a special use permit. There's a lot of words here, but in general, this was provided online as a means to get authorization to build and maintain trails within state-owned land, right? It's all about doing it right and not having the rogue nature of given trails, right? We just can't have people going out there and doing their own thing. So at this time, the Litchfield Trail Crew is looking at filing for a special use permit, go through those proper channels, that process to request a trail, right? So we're looking to submit the required permit for consideration, ultimately working with the state to ensure there's no sensitive areas encroached, and then also bringing that trail up to code, whether it's a bridge, signage, etc. And ultimately, we want to be a good steward of Litchfield State Forest. So we want to be part of that trail volunteer steward program. I've heard about it, haven't gotten many details of it, so hopefully we can work with the state to get in on that and ultimately help maintain and police the trail going forward so we don't have these road trails popping up. And I think in closing, what we're looking for right now is support from the town. So we have Board of Selectmen approval and their backing to submit a permit in the proper fashion. So ultimately, you'll see going forward, the Litchfield Trail Crew working with the state to submit a permit application for consideration. It's important, you know, it's not a us versus them issue. It's about going through the proper process. And hopefully the state will be able to work with us and consider various options in moving forward. So I think that concludes the presentation. Are there any questions from the commission?
Rob, before we take questions, I'm going to go into the next section, but I would mention at this time that I agree with you. As you work with any landowner, you have to ask the landowner permission. So that's the process that you're going through, and that's exactly what you should be doing. So that would be the case with any landowner. Before we take questions, I'd like to go into, save your questions, write them down if you have them. I'd like to talk to William Cornelius from the State Forester, and he can further introduce people he has with him. William, are you there?
Okay, so I'll go ahead and stop sharing here.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah. Good evening. Good evening, Joan, and the Conservation Commission. I'm William Cornelius, or Billy Cornelius, whatever you want to call me. I'm Forester 1 with the state of New Hampshire, Forest and Lands in the south region of the state. So one of my properties that I manage is Litchfield State Forest. And so today with me here, I have Regional Forester Scott Rawl and also Jim Ayler, the Habitat Program Supervisor for Fish and Game. So we're going to kind of each tackle some separate little parts of some presentations that we have for you to kind of explain, what multiple use management on state properties and, impacts that trails can have on wildlife. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott first. He'll go first and kind of give you guys a little introduction.
Thanks, Bill.
Hi, folks. As Billy introduced me, I am the Regional Forester for the South Region of the Division of Forest and Lands, Forest Management Bureau. We manage all the state forests and state parks in the southern part of the state. So it's a good opportunity to, I guess, talk about a little bit about management on our state lands and our state. They're really all classified as state reservations. And I'll just try to share my screen here if I can get this up and running.
Good. Looks good.
You guys can see that okay?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Great. So obviously managing recreation trails on state reservations has its challenges, as some folks in town have come to find out through us finding some illegal rogue trails that weren't there in the past. Oftentimes we're not back to properties for a period of time in between our treatments of the state forested area for either habitat purposes or managing the timber. And sometimes a lot of things can transpire unbeknownst to us and other staff. So our state reservations, there's a number of purposes where actually garnered through state legislation to manage, and one is to provide habitat and for a diverse population of plants and animals. And another is a sustainable source of forest products, which supports forest industry and supports the residents of the state with a local product that they can actually use themselves. Another important one today is mitigating climate change. Our forests are ever becoming more and more important to carbon sequestration and carbon storage. And important today, because of COVID, a place for multi-use recreation. And This past year, I think we're all well aware of the impact this has had on our public lands. Oftentimes not for the better. It's kind of amazing what some people will do when they go and recreate in a beautiful place and leave all their trash behind. So as managers of public lands, we try to balance all these uses of the users and of the resources and try to make sure they're all compatible. And we want to minimize those impacts to those natural resources we're trying to manage. So as Billy said, we're from the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. We used to be called DREAD because we had some other divisions within us, which have been separated off over time. And we oversee all of the management on state reservations, whether they're state parks or state forests. And we do actively manage our state parks for wildlife habitat and forest production. So Bear Brook State Park and Petropolis State Park sees active management regularly. And we try to balance, the impacts to the trails when we do those projects and other recreation at the same time. We have just about 170,000 acres spread throughout the state, from Hollis to Pittsburgh, New Hampshire. 58,000 of those are found in the south region of the state. And our focus on the state forest is for the natural resources that they provide in the management. But as Rob said, all of our properties are open to passive recreation. And we do allow snowmobile trails and hiking trails to be on those properties. But oftentimes what we find is, there may be one trail that exists today, and it could be a forest access road that's utilized by folks to go from point A to point B on abutting properties. And then it turns into somebody wanting a trail that goes out on this end of the property, and then somebody wanting a trail on the other side of the property. And before you know it, you have a property that's severely fragmented by human use. So at this point in time, I'm going to let Billy just kind of take over with what's transpired on Litchfield and how we've tried to address it. And maybe in the future here, we can work with those local folks that are interested in becoming volunteers through our volunteer program and work together to provide trails that have a minimal impact to all the resources out there in the forest.
All right, so I'm just going to share my screen real quick here. Okay, so yeah, so I'll address kind of what's been going on at Litchfield, since that's one of the properties that I manage. So, I think a big thing to start off with is the fact that, we don't just show up on a property that we own one day and just decide that we don't want a trail there anymore, and we block it off and put up a sign that says trail closed. There's a lot of thought that goes into it, and a lot of research that goes into it before we actually go out there and start actually blocking a trail off. So pretty much this past spring, early spring of 2020, it was starting to show up on my work plan that it was about time to come back to Litchfield State Forest at some point. So, I usually take a drive over to whatever property I'm looking at and just see how the past timber harvests have gone, how the young trees have grown back, So that's what I was doing at Litchfield. So I was taking a swing by to take a walk around the property and see what was going on. And so while I was out there, you know, I observed multiple trails that were not on our database of our trails and our forest stands that we maintain. So that kind of raised some questions with me. I was kind of like, well, I don't know quite where these trails are coming from, so you know, I'm gonna have to look into that. You know, also on top of that, you know, all these trails had been signed. Well, most of them at that point. What's being called as the Two Bridges trail had not been signed at that point. But all the other trails had been signed. And when I went and walked down them, you know, I found wetland crossings that, you know, were just sticks laid across depressions that were obviously, you know, spring runoff areas, you know, for wetland areas. And so those bridges were, you know, effectively blocking wetland, you know, processes basically. You know, and also found, you know, even found a random bench that had been put out next to the big wetland that's in Litchfield State Forest, and you know, just kind of surprised to find a bench out in the middle of the woods overlooking a wetland. You know, not typically things that we would be putting on our state forests. So, kind of piqued my curiosity and, you know, made me say, well, I guess we got to kind of look at this a little bit. So about that time, the Litchfield Conservation Commission contacted me because they were having some issues on a couple of their trails, and they were thinking about, you know, temporarily closing them down to do some maintenance work on those trails to restore those trails, and those trails came into the state forest. So they were contacting me to let me know that, you know, they were going to be closing their trails down, and just so that we have a heads up on what's going on. So during that time, I was like, oh, well, I was actually just out there, and you know, noticed that we had some rogue trails that aren't on our database that are out here. And so, you know, let them know that, you know, I was going to be doing a little research into them to see if they were legitimate or not. And then, you know, if they were not legitimate, I'd be discontinuing those trails. So then during the summer of 2020, I performed a forest inventory out there. And while I was out there doing my forest inventory plots, continued to kind of just walk down those trails when I had time, just to see what was going on, see, you know, if they were getting a lot of use and what was going on with them. And so during that time, this past summer, I actually discovered another trail that was being created off of that Twin Bridges or Two Bridges trail. And it appeared to be, from what I could find, running to people's houses that border Litchfield State Forest and running into their backyards. And then over on the other side of the state forest, I found where someone was expanding another trail over there and actually scraping, had a shovel out there and was scraping topsoil off of a ledge to make it, I would suppose, make it better for mountain biking somehow, you know, by removing soil. So then, you know, when I had time throughout the summer, you know, because Litchfield isn't my only property. We have 58,000 acres of property in the South region, so it keeps me pretty busy. You know, I double checked our database some more, looked back, you know, into past documents to find where trails were originated from, and talked to the previous foresters who managed Litchfield State Forest to see if they remembered any of these trails being out there when they were the managers there and doing timber management, which they could not remember either of those trails, either the Twin Bridges or the Calvin Loop Trail, being present when they were on the property. So with that research and data that I had collected and observed out there, I finally had the time in this past winter to go out there and start to close those trails down. So made an interpretive sign that explains, very thoroughly the reasons of, why those trails were closed down. Posted that at the entrances and exits of the trails, and flagged everything off and cut some trees down. So we've already seen these maps tonight, but so the map on the left is the trails as I found them this spring when I was out there. And then this map on the right is the trails that are approved for Litchfield State Forest. So what's the purpose of trail closure? Why do we close trails? So one of the main reasons, the first few reasons here are somewhat legal in manner, but the basics were that these trails were not created with the proper procedure and review that we require for trails on our properties. And so at that point, they're listed as illegal or rogue trails, which are not supposed to be there. These trails also included unsafe and unapproved bridge designs, which you really almost can't even call them bridges. And those in some of the instances block the wetlands from the proper flowage that they should have, and not even blocking from flowage, but logs laid into a wetland like that can also block proper movement of some wildlife species, and so it can be detrimental to wildlife species. And then the trails were also signed, and when I went out there fairly recently, I think sometime this fall, someone went out with spray paint and spray painted blazes on trees, marking all these trails. And that was also done without any permissions granted from the state. And also I've found where people have spray painted initials, I'm assuming, on trees out on these trails. So it was definitely an issue. So getting out of some of the more legal reasons that the trails were closed, it's important to understand and realize that trails fragment wildlife habitat. And so, as managers of multiple use properties, it's important for us to manage all different aspects. And so these trails, significantly reduced the undisturbed area of Litchfield State Forest where wildlife species could enjoy without necessarily being disturbed by humans. There may still be that person who's just bushwhacking through the forest, but it's not going to be 100 people walking down a trail. And that's important. That's an important difference. And the trails that we decommissioned, they don't necessarily support a connectivity to other trail systems They don't connect directly to the trails that run off of Litchfield State Forest and connect to the abutting town properties. It doesn't hinder the ability to get from Litchfield State Forest to the Musquash conservation area. So, it was essentially just removing a couple loops, which there's also already a couple other loops on that property that can still be utilized that are in lower impact areas. And basically, so, the big thing is removing these trails. It offers the wildlife that's living on the state forest a greater opportunity to live an undisturbed life, and it also decreases the chance of mortality, with still providing an excellent recreational opportunity on Litchfield State Forest. We're not removing all the trails. We're just removing some trails that have the highest impact to the wildlife species. And I think an important thing to realize, and I'm sure Jim will probably touch on this later on, is the decreased chance of mortality isn't necessarily someone running over a turtle, like almost is going to happen in this picture that, on this slide. Increased mortality can happen from an animal being spooked and having to use its conserved energy to run away from someone on a trail, can then make that animal more susceptible to predation or some other aspect because it's expended extra energy. So it's deeper than I think most people understand it to be. So how do we decommission trails? I know there's been some comments about how the trails were decommissioned, and I think it's important to understand that there's certain procedures that we go through to make sure that the trails that we decommission stay decommissioned. So one thing that we found over time of managing thousands of acres of land and having to deal with rogue trails is that flagging off or putting a sign at a trail entrance and saying that this trail is closed is not going to stop people. They're going to tear down the flagging, they're going to move the sign. It's pretty easy to just continue using that trail. So what we do is we use a method that's called hinge cutting. And we go throughout the trail and hinge cut trees by cutting 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through the stem and then tipping the tree over. So ideally, the tree will still be connected to that stem, and that provides a couple different benefits. It provides that it's harder for someone to come in and move the tree out because it's still connected. But then it also provides wildlife habitat, because hinge cutting is actually a technique that's used to create wildlife habitat, because a tree that's still connected to the stump will continue to actually leaf out and green up every year for a few years. And so that provides great wildlife habitat for rabbits and a variety of small mammals, as well as browse for white-tailed deer. So we're providing wildlife habitat there. It's also important to note that when we're cutting these trees to block a trail, we aren't just going out and just randomly cutting trees. It's kind of a process, and so we're choosing lower quality trees or suppressed stems from the understory that aren't ever really going to be a great, big, awesome tree in the future. So we're cutting those trees down to block the trail, and then, kind of getting those out, and that provides actually what we call timber stand improvement, where then you could actually be releasing other trees that have a better chance of being a good, healthy tree for the future. And then that actually allows them to grow faster and healthier because they don't have competition from an adjacent low quality stem. So even though it looks like we're going out and just randomly cutting down stems, there's actually quite a science behind it. And, every tree that I cut down, I looked around and made sure that that's the one that I wanted to cut down before I did it. And then once we go through and we do the hinge cutting, I flagged off the ends of the trail just to make people notice that those trails are closed. And then I installed the interpretive signs that I created to explain to people why there was these trail closures, and then providing my contact information in case they had questions so that they could contact me and I could answer their questions and concerns. So that's pretty much that's all I have as far as that. So now I am going to turn it over to Jim, and he can continue with talking to us about wildlife a little bit, and then we'll kind of close it out. We can't hear you, Jim.
Yeah, Jim, I think you're on mute.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yep, you're good now.
So I'm Jim Ayler, habitat biologist for Fish and Game, and along with a small team of folks, I manage Fish and Game's 60,000 acres of wildlife management areas across the state, properties focused on wildlife habitat conservation. A few years ago, my colleagues at Fish and Game and I were wondering what sort of impacts a recreational use of conserved lands primarily would have on wildlife. We have our landscape is cut up by commercial and residential development and roads, and even our woodlands are, have a considerable amount of trail building and maintenance going on. And so we were thinking, where are there areas for wildlife to be undisturbed and thrive, and what sort of impact does recreation have on wildlife? And so we started looking at that. And next slide, there we go. And this paper does a really good job of reviewing research that was done through the years on recreational impacts on wildlife, published in the journal PLOS ONE in 2016. These authors looked at 274 research papers from both North America and Europe, looked at all taxa, birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians. And this graphic sort of summarizes what they found. And I'll take you through it. It's kind of a little bit complicated, but they looked at, let's take Nordic skiing. 9 papers were reviewed. Those 9 papers reported on 27 results. Of those, over 50% showed a negative impact on wildlife. And those negative impacts could be reduced abundance, reduced reproduction, or just not there. The critters just aren't there. Snowmobiling, 6 papers were reviewed, produced 13 results, 75% of those results negative. Hiking and running, 112 papers reviewed, 792 results reported on, nearly 50% of those negative. You can see that regardless of what activity you have or are engaged in, the results indicate a pretty significant negative impact. Very small percentage of positive impacts, and those positive impacts might be things like increased number of rock pigeons. Is that a truly an amazing positive impact? The unclear ones might be like increased vocalizations of birds. You don't know if that's positive, don't know if it's negative. So of the significant results, the vast majority of them were negative. So regardless of what activity you're engaged in, regardless of where you're doing it, you're likely having a negative impact on some wildlife. And here are some real world examples. Some researchers in Ontario looked at conserved lands, some with trails, some without trails, and they found breeding birds certainly on all the lands, but far fewer on lands with recreational trails and a good amount of recreation. Those lands without recreation had a significantly higher number of songbirds utilizing them. And some other research in Connecticut, researchers did a long-term study on wood turtle populations on some conserved lands there in that state, about 400 acres, and it was a really, really healthy population for a long time until trails were introduced on the property, and the population started dwindling and dwindling to the extent that it blinked out altogether. And after eliminating several other factors, they concluded that it was really the introduction of that trail system and the human use of that trail system that ended up, eliminating that population. The collection, the disturbance, the damaging of nests in trail systems, et cetera. And Litchfield State Forest, it's in the middle of a priority area for state endangered blandings turtles. And so trying to provide opportunities for those folks, for those critters to live undisturbed, to maintain that population is important. So because of these impacts that we found in the literature, we decided to pursue or build a tool to help land managers site recreational trails with wildlife in mind. We need to get folks outside. We need to get them to enjoy nature, appreciate the work that we do in conserving nature, but also reap the physical and mental benefits of being outside. So we need a tool to help site trails with wildlife in mind would be a prudent thing to work on. And this tool was built based on 5 principles. Avoid special habitat types, pine barrens, shrub areas, shrublands where some of our most declining species might reside. Route trails away from wet areas. Wet areas provide important habitats for fur bearers, waterfowl, wetland birds, a variety of wildlife, but also the upland edges of those wet areas provide important travel corridors, very much natural travel corridors for all sorts of wildlife. Route trails along habitat edges. We know habitat edges are important for wildlife, but it's far better to route a trail along a habitat edge than to put it through the middle of a shrubland or through the middle of a deer wintering area, for instance, that sort of thing. Avoid known locations of rare species. The Natural Heritage Bureau maintains a rare species database. We use that data to include that in our tool. And avoid steep slope areas. Bobcats like steep slopes, small-footed bats, some of our rare species like steep slope areas, but it's also important from just a trail maintenance standpoint. You don't want to locate trails on steep slopes. So as Rob showed you earlier, this is what the trails look like. The official ones and the unofficial trails look like with regards to this tool, the Trails for People and Wildlife tool. And you can see, as he mentioned, that these 2 trails do go through moderate and even some high sensitivity areas from a wildlife standpoint. But this is only one factor to look at. From a wildlife standpoint. The other factor to consider is the corridor of influence, because wildlife can see and hear you coming from a good distance off trail. And that's referred to as the corridor of influence. And in our research that we did in building this tool, we found that birds will flee within 60 feet of disturbance. Reptiles and amphibians become disturbed. They become alert. Birds become alert within 150 feet. So the difference is birds will flee within 60 feet, but they'll become alert far further from a trail, 150 feet, and mammals will become disturbed as much as 400 feet away from a trail. And that's 1 1/3 football fields, to give you a sort of a perspective on that. And so that's what the corridor of influence looks like with both the unofficial and the official trails at Litchfield State Forest. And you'll see a good amount of the habitat there on the property is disturbed by that trail system, upwards of 72% of Litchfield State Forest. Take the unofficial trails away by decommissioning them, as Billy did, and it looks far better from a wildlife disturbance standpoint. You have about half the property disturbed, the most important part of the property from a wildlife standpoint left undisturbed. And so you're looking about 51%. So it seemed like a reasonable balance, providing the best habitat for wildlife, leaving it undisturbed, but still providing recreational opportunities for folks to enjoy that property and connect to neighboring trails. And even if you were to leave just the Calvin Loop trail in, but take I think the Twin Bridges trail out, you're still looking at 69% disturbance factor on that property. So if folks want to learn more about this tool and how to use it, we have a guide that you can download on wildnh.com/trails. And you can also listen to and watch a much more comprehensive webinar that I put on a few months ago as well. So I hope folks will be able to avail themselves of these tools and help site trails in the town of Litchfield with wildlife in mind.
Thank you, Jim. So I hope all of you stay on WebEx there and entertain any questions anyone might have at this time for any Rob, Terry, or any of the state people.
Thank you, Joan. Yeah, this is Rob Terry. I do have a quick follow-up question for Jim.
Sure.
Could you comment on the impact variance relative to trails versus planned logging in the area that's actually in the process of being bid and potentially happening later this year?
Sure. Yep. Any sort of timber harvesting that occurs on state lands goes through a very comprehensive review process that includes input from a variety of resource agencies, including Fish and Game and our non-game and endangered species program. And so we work with the state lands foresters to ensure that in high priority rare species areas, that those rare species needs are taken into account. And for instance, at Litchfield State Forest, because it is in a priority Blandings turtle area, the timing of that harvest is going to be modified to take into account so that harvesting will occur outside of the primary activity period of Blandings turtles. But also timber harvesting is well known as being a technique to improve habitat for a variety of wildlife. Different silvicultural techniques are used to attain different types of habitat conditions that can benefit a myriad of wildlife, from woodland songbirds to shrubland songbirds to game birds to mammals. And so, it's all very well planned out and with specific goals in mind. And one of those goals is improving habitat. And those operations occur, once every 10, 15, 20 years, depending on the property. So they're in there once and then they're out for quite a long time, whereas recreation occurs on a consistent recurring basis year round, 24, well, not 24/7, it's a little exaggeration, but nearly every day.
Okay, thank you. I do have another question for you, and it comes down to the new tool that's being used. Can you comment on the accuracy or precision relative to that tool?
Sure. Any computerized model is just that, a model. It provides a good guideline, and nothing beats boots on the ground. And if you read the guidebook and watch the webinar, go through a pretty comprehensive process of what you should do to use the tool as a guide, but then verify it with boots on the ground. And certainly Billy has done that in spades. He's been there quite a lot.
Okay. And that being said, the map that you showed actually painted a pretty bad picture relative to impact. Has that been validated against boots on the ground and kind of folded back into that model to make sure that it was indeed correct?
I would say by Billy, but not by me, but I'm happy to do so.
Absolutely. And I think the last question I would have is, it comes back to our request to pursue a permit. In your opinion at this time, is it worth pursuing and trying to work with the state to get potentially a trail opened back up or rerouted accordingly.
From my perspective, from a wildlife standpoint, if this came to me, if the proposal for the Calvin Loop came to me and asked me of my opinion, I would recommend that it not be approved.
Okay.
Thank you. Marion has
Is
a
that
question.
based on the tool or boots on the ground?
That's based on the tool, but I have been on the Litchfield State Forest, not recently. So I do have some sense of what's there. But again, I'm happy to go there and verify.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me. I have a question. Now that these trails are closed down and the wildlife that has been impacted from the usage and stuff like that, how long before these various species of animals, birds, turtles, whatever, recover to the point that they were pre-trail usage?
Boy, I don't know that I can give you a definitive answer on that. You know, it depends on the species' life history and the health of the population, not only on the property, but in nearby areas. You know, I can give you a guess. For songbirds, I think it would probably take, I don't know, half a dozen years perhaps for populations to recover. For turtles, it could be much longer because they are long-lived species, poor reproducers. And so it can take their populations much longer to recover.
Harry, did you have anything? Question? Did you have a question?
No. The only comment I have to make is just listening to the whole presentation. Moores Falls is an example. When I was out there, I heard comments that, gee, there seems to be a lack of wildlife out there. And we know that Moores Falls over the past year has had a major increase in activity, of human activity, of walking through. Now, even I have gone out there, and creatures like chipmunks and squirrels were noticeable lacking. You would expect to see more of those types of animals because there were a lot of acorn droppings. So I can understand what you're talking about. So that was.
Is anybody, Diane, go ahead. You have to unmute.
When was the last time that Litchfield Forest was harvested for timber? Does anybody have an answer for that?
Yes, I'm sure they do. Bill, do you have an answer for when it was last harvested? I can recall it.
Yep. Yeah. So the last time that there was a timber harvest in Litchfield State Forest was in kind of, I guess I would call it the rear section, closer to Aldrich Street, and that was harvested last in 2010. So there was a harvest in 2008, and then there was a large windstorm, and they had to go back in and pick up some trees that had blown down. And then there was actually a wildlife habitat project there in 2015 where they created brush piles for New England cottontail habitat.
Yeah, the Bunny Project.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
That was it. I was just curious when was the last time that we were in there from that. So how often do you expect that it will be done? And how long will it take the forest will it impact like the regular trails so that people will have to stay off them while you're doing that this year?
Yep. Yeah. So we'll be harvesting. We say this year, but it'll probably be a 2-year contract. So it could either be this year or it could be next year. But yes, there will be probably have to be some closures to some of the trails because we'll be accessing that through the parking lot and using one of the existing log yards, and kind of the main trail that runs through the center of the property is our truck road that we've historically used for timber harvest. So it's typically.
Notice though?
What's that?
There'll be plenty of notice for us to be able to notify residents that it's not going to be usable for a period of time.
Yes. So with the whole timber sale process, we just sent out, according with our timber sale process, we sent letters to all the abutters and the town selectmen and conservation commission. And then in the spring, once the sale is marked and you can see what trees are going to be cut, we'll have a public walk. Since there's a lot of public use on that property, we'll be having a public walk to discuss the timber sale with the public. So if they have questions, and then we'll be posting signage, and we'll be notifying the Conservation Commission, when that project's going to be happening. It's not exact, because it all depends on whoever wins the contract, when their schedule works. So it may not be, it'll be a broad range of, this is when the trails could be closed. We can't really give you an idea until maybe a lot of times a week or two before. The logger may call us and be like, I'm ready to go next week. So the immediate thing may be fairly close, but we can notify, the Conservation Commission, Board of Selectmen, whoever wants to put notices out.
And exactly what impact there will be, like what trails will be closed for approximately how long they'll be closed, all of that.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
And Diane, just let me follow up real quick with, we're actually working with UNH Cooperative Extension to do some educational opportunities this spring or early summer for a workshop on Litchfield State Forest and talk about the red pine scale. One of the reasons why we are harvesting right now is because the red pine stands that are within that state forest were planted back in the 30s. And we have red pine scale, which is an invasive insect that actually kills red pine. We've seen this result to the south of us, and we've experienced it in Bear Brook in 2012. So where there's red pine kind of surrounding that main trail that's used in Litchfield, we don't want to have a bunch of dead trees there with people recreating on the property either. So it's a good opportunity to remove the red pine before mortality happens, and while releasing the advanced understory that's developed from the last timber sales. But with that, we're also going to expand that parking area that's in the front there, off of what's
Albuquerque.
that building?
Yeah.
Albuquerque. We're going to expand that parking area and try to make it more hospitable to having a few more cars in there and pushing the access back, and probably installing a gate there, because I think you folks should have a gate in case there's some type of emergency. If somebody gets hurt in the middle of the property or towards the back of the property, emergency services could get in there and get access as well.
Nice. I like the educational part of it too. I think that we would have some people take advantage of that.
Good.
And if I can just add a couple comments about one of Rob's questions, and then about one of his slides that I forgot to address in my presentation. But so I know Rob was like, well, our maps look pretty bleak as far as the recreation goes, and asking about boots on the ground. I think boots on the ground can attest to the what areas are high impact or moderate impact or low impact as far as wildlife. But I think as far as the buffer tool and the quarter of influence goes, my boots on the ground don't necessarily work towards that. But there's been all that data came from a lot of scientific studies of wildlife biologists studying this. And so that's where the boots on the ground have identified that already. And so that allows us to now put a 400-foot buffer on a GPS trail and confidently say that wildlife is impacted in this area because, wildlife biologists have studied that. And then I know Rob had pulled out a couple other examples of some areas in Bear Brook State Park and then in Musquash. And I think it's important to understand the differences in some of our properties. So Bear Brook State Park is a state park. It is not a state forest. And so state parks have areas of developed recreation, where then recreation takes a little bit of a higher priority within those areas. And so around that Beaver Pond area is an area that's actually classified in the recreation management zone. So that area, that established recreation within that area sometimes takes a higher precedent over other areas. And Bear Brook is 10,000 acres in size. And so we have very many areas of large, undisturbed areas that the wildlife can use instead. And it's also important to realize that Bear Brook has been around for a long time. So a lot of these trails, you may look at them, they may be in a little bit of a higher impact area, but they're sort of grandfathered in because they were accepted and approved by prior administrations, before they had all the tools that they have now. That's not saying that we aren't currently looking at some of those trails and how to mitigate some of the impacts that some of those trails do have on those properties. So I think that's important to realize, Litchfield State Forest, we don't have developed recreation areas because it's a forest and not a park. And so it's much more of a balancing, we have to balance all the uses. It's a multiple use property. And, I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. We usually look like the bad guys, but we're really trying to balance it out so everyone gets the same ability. So right now, with all those trails there, 72% of the property was impacted by recreation. Removing those trails, 51% of the property is impacted by recreation. So from our eyes, that's a much better balance. People still get the ability to recreate. They still get the ability to connect to other, trail systems and Musquash on town properties. But then, within the highly developed just highly developed area of Litchfield itself, you see all the houses around there. It's important to have big areas, as big as we can get, of undisturbed area for wildlife. That's really important to maintain your wildlife structure for Litchfield.
That's a good segue into, for years and years, we tried to get a connection between Litchfield State Forest and the Musquash Swamp. And finally, we got airport mitigation land that afforded that connection. So it's really important to have that unbroken habitat between the two. And I'm glad to see that we finally got that connection. The airport mitigation came from, the developer went to Londonderry Conservation and said, well, what can we do to mitigate? And they said, go talk to Litchfield because we're trying to make this connection. And that's how that all came about. So we're happy to see that. And I want to thank you all for very good education for all of us. And I hope, Jason, do you have any questions or anything?
I've got a quick question for Scott. Can you tell us a little bit about the Trail Steward Program?
Could you make that?
As far as becoming a volunteer, Jason, or?
Yeah, Joan, I was just asking about the Trail Steward Program.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, Scott.
Yeah,
Tell us
we
a
have
little bit about it.
Well, from the little bit, I converse a lot with the volunteer organizer for parks, and so it's a staff person that's staffed within the Parks and Recreation, and she manages all the volunteers and the volunteer groups on our state lands. So if there's a group local that wants to volunteer, we more than welcome it. I can put you in contact with her and connect you with her, and she organizes all the paperwork and all the work plans and anything else that folks want to transpire on volunteering on the trails and doing trail work on our state lands. So then everybody's accounted for. We know what's going on, and we work together to accomplish any goals folks may have with new bridges or new culverts or new crossings or anything else.
Yeah, Diane, one last question.
Scott, what is the name of the person that does that? What is her name?
Her name is Jessie. Her last name is Creedy, Creedy.
And a phone number to reach her at?
I can have Billy send it to you.
Okay.
I don't know her phone number right off the top of my head, but we can certainly get you that information and pass it along.
Okay, back to you, Jason. Sorry about that.
Madam Chairman, I have.
Michael, go ahead.
So this has been a very interesting discussion this evening, and I want to thank the members of the state who were here this evening. I think you did a great job presenting to the commission. And, I think there is such an importance now with protecting the wildlife that we have, especially in Litchfield. And the state forest is really the last stronghold for that, I believe, in this town. With that said, I'm trying to understand something. I mean, this presentation this evening, we're talking about the Litchfield Trail Group, and we're talking about the state forest, okay? And my understanding was when this group came before the board a couple months ago, there was a discussion about how they were going to work what their mission was going to be in terms of town properties and what basically it was going to do as a subcommittee. It was almost like it was going to be a subcommittee for the Conservation Commission.
But then they decided not to become a subcommittee.
So this is totally different. This is a separate organization that's doing its separate own thing in the town of Litchfield.
Right.
And I appreciate that. I think it's a great thing. And I think that you folks, I applaud you for that. My only concern is that we are the Conservation Commission. We are not the state of New Hampshire. The state of New Hampshire is represented here tonight. If these folks want to lobby the state to, put trails in or to get a special permit or something, that's fine. But there's not much we can probably add to this. I mean, it's certainly a state issue, number one. Number two, I mean, I think from hearing what I'm hearing tonight, I mean, I think from all the data that they have provided us, all of the information that the state has provided us, they're basically, I would definitely support the closure of these trails if it's going to improve the wildlife habitat in the state forest. So if we were members of the state, I would definitely be opposed to any trails being built or constructed in that area that have been rogue trails or whatever you want to call them. Right. If the Litchfield Trail Group is interested in working with the Conservation Commission to help improve on town lands, we are more than welcome to work with them on that, and more than welcome to look at the town, because it is the town, not the state. If they want to go to the state, they can go to the state. They can go to their state representatives in Concord. They can go to the Department of Council of Natural Resources, and they can do whatever they want to do to get public input or whatever, and there's a process that goes along with that within the state. Yeah. So I think I appreciate what this group is doing, but I just think that in terms of this overall structure, because we've talked a lot about the state forest tonight, there isn't a lot of that we can really, I mean, we have properties that abut, and certainly we can work with the state to, improve those properties. But as far as, the group itself is concerned, maybe I was confused in terms of what.
Well, I think tonight was important to totally be from an education process that.
Right.
I mean, people listening in, I know there's 2 selectmen listening in, that needed to be said as far as education. And I agree with you that's why I said in the beginning that they can deal with any landowner they want to. They have to get permission from the landowner. In this case, the state is the landowner.
Right.
I agree with Michael, though. We have such rarity as far as large tracts of natural land, undeveloped land. that disrupting what has already been kind of worked with and trying to be preserved is counterproductive to what is happening. And now that these trails have been closed, there's still ample trails that people can hike on or bird watch on and stuff like that, that will be of much less impact to the wildlife and natural resources.
Okay, I think we'll wrap it up with that, those comments, and thank you to all the state people, and Rob, thank you as well, for listening in and.
Joe,
We
I
appreciate
one.
I just wanted to say, we appreciate the opportunity to communicate with everybody and
I think that's really important, yeah.
even just talk about, you know, the upcoming state forest and what we hope to do with the parking area additionally on the state forest. Since
Yeah, that's good.
after all, the town hall used to be part of the state forest, so.
That's right, that's right, you're right. Thank you again.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, John.
So, not take any action on that, and,
But before we move forward, I'd just like to make one statement. I think the whole trail crew and new state forest kind of got blended together and grayed over
wait,
because it
who's
happened
that?
why
Stephen,
they were
you
trying
know
to.
who was talking? Stephen's that you? Okay.
It
Go
is,
ahead.
yeah. So I think what happened was the two issues got grayed over as they were starting to come up. So we got to kind of look at them at two different spots. I think what the trail crew is trying to do by being a conduit of voice between property owners, the town property, conservation land, and rec land is a wonderful thing. You know, we're always looking for more volunteers to go off and get things done on our land. Of course, they can't do anything without the approval of the, of a personal landowner,
Right.
the town land, the rec, or the conservation. But, you know, when we took action as a Board of Selectmen to support them, that was how we were looking at it. Because we think it's a great thing for us to have another resource to get people out there who are dedicated for, you know, people to do recreation in town. So that's where we came from on our decision. And as Michael said, it's up to them if they want to go off and solicit the state and see if they can get the trail open. But I think from a town, I know that the Board of Selectmen has supported this group, so has the rec, and I would love to see the Conservation Commission do the same thing.
I think it's good that they're out there working, but I think that you have to look at all factors of what the impacts are and not just the people impact. You know, you have to look at the whole picture.
Without a doubt. I agree 100%. And that's why, you know, they are going to bring suggestions forward. And, you know, everybody will put their minds together and we'll figure out the right thing to do for the community based on the impact all around.
Okay.
But nice to see another group of 35 people want to help out in town and do the right thing.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
Do you have the names of the people on that committee?
Yes, I do. You probably. All right, let's move along to approve November, December, January minutes. Okay, let's do November 1st. Remember?
Yeah, Roger can pass me one down.
Well, Glenn just probably ran out of November.
Oh, I wasn't here for November.
I'll give yours to Roger then.
I think Andrew.
It's balls. Airplane it over.
Pass it, take one, pass one down. Come on, guys.
Great.
Just December. You there? You there? Yeah.
What do you need, a motion?
Yeah,
to-
make a, yeah, a motion.
Just one thing. I had moved to abstain from the discussion in number one on the gas station. I just
Okay.
want that to be
Okay.
reflected in
Yeah.
the minutes.
December, okay.
So I think the vote, well, vote says 4-0-0, but I don't think I voted.
Okay,
Or I abstained, I think.
okay.
So we can make a motion to accept the,
As corrected?
as corrected. I'll make a motion, we accept November's meeting with noted corrections.
Matt seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, December. I have more copies of December 3 this way. 4 this way. 4 that way. 1 from that. Okay, December.
I make a motion that we approve.
Okay, Matt and
I'll second it.
Tom seconds. All those in favor of approving December as printed? Say aye.
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 That was. 4, 5, 6, 0, 0.
Steve voting too.
I had to abstain.
He's abstaining,
He
so
wasn't here.
6, 0, 1. Okay, January's the last one. That way. 4 this way.
Actually, Madam Chairman, I'm very, very sorry. I made a mistake. On the 11/5/2020 minutes, I wasn't at that meeting.
11/5.
Yeah,
You weren't
I
there?
thought this was the January meeting, this
Okay.
meeting that
So
you just gave
November's
us.
okay then, all right.
But I don't see, I'm going to say again, for this one on the first.
January?
The January meeting when I was here, I abstained from
Abstain,
that
yeah,
discussion, so that just has to be added to that.
Okay,
And actually, you can take out the amendment to the 11/5 because I wasn't at that meeting.
okay.
Sorry. I totally screwed that up.
We'll do it all in one motion. In November will be fine and no amendment, and January will add Michael abstain. So I need a motion when you're done reading. All set with January?
Go ahead, Roger.
Madam Chairman, I move we accept as read.
I'll second.
As corrected with Michael being
Abstain.
abstaining.
The second point of business.
Okay. That was Roger and Matt. Vote to approve January minutes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, 601. Okay, and under correspondence, which I don't have on there, we did get notice from the state regarding the logging operation that they will be doing. I have an extra copy if anybody wants it. They're in the early stages of planning this harvest. We do not anticipate offering for public bidding until summer of 2021. At that time, you'll be notified as to the timber volume sold and a successful bidder who will be responsible for the timber tax. And then they did have noticed all the abutters to the property, the Conservation Commission and the selectmen. Okay. Does anybody have anything to add? You want to do the rainfall report, or you want to save that for next month?
I have it for January.
Okay, January? Okay, go.
Yeah. Snowfall was 8.75 inches,
Mhm.
and it was pretty dry. Liquid, the melt in the liquid rain was 1.71 inches. And the coldest day was on the 31st, was -2 degrees.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have anything to add to the agenda before we go to non-public? We'll do a roll call.
I just want to be sure, how are myself, Steve, and going to be allowed to stay in when we're in non-public? John, are you still there, Trevor, now?
So we'll leave the WebEx up and we'll disconnect from here and leave the audio up in the room, so you'll be all set.
Thanks, dude.
So Russ said you could, when you disconnect from there, I can phone in off the desk, is that correct?
We won't have to, Joan. He just said he was going to disconnect everybody else except for us,
Oh, okay.
which he just did. Right, John?
Most people already dropped, so Russ, just keep your end up for the audio side.
So just Stephen and Diane will be on?
Yep,
Okay, thank
it's
you.
all to one now, so once we stop streaming, you'll be all by yourselves.
Okay. Make a motion that we go into non-public for 91, RSA 91-A3.
I second it.
Harry seconds it. Roll call vote. Joan, yes. Matt, you're an alternate.
Yes.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
yes. Michael?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Okay, all in favor of going to non-public. So we can go into non-public.
I am also a yes.
Oh, sorry, Stephen. I forget, you're just up there
You're
as a
out of sight.
name.
Out of sight, you can't see.
Where's your happy little face?
Steve, I also made you a co-host just in case there's any issues.